The last two, or I guess three sides that I need to work on for, making it look nice is the entire back, which is an awful lot of surface area to be sanding, and then these two sides here. And since my garage isn't tall enough for me to pop this upright, and even if I were to take it outside and pop it upright, I'd have to work on a ladder. I'm just going to have to work on these two sides here, vertical, so I'm always going to have some running issues with epoxy on it, but I'm just going to sand and paint with thin coats of epoxy and do the best I can on those sides. Also, as nice of handles as they've been, it is about time to chop these guys off. I'm going to be leaving a ½ inch or so sticking out, so any water that comes out will drip off the boat, but it is time to cut those down to size. Now I have some drips going down. The biggest part to work on is this right here, that seam where the extra fiberglass cloth folded over. So I have lots of little strands of fiberglass cloth strands running all over the place. So I'm going to have to sand that side down a whole bunch, and then the rest of this flatten it out before I put a pretty thick coat of epoxy resin and just kind of skim coat the whole thing. Alright, the high points and the drips are knocked down quite a bit. I still have an awful lot of low points and wrinkles and drips that are mostly visible in here, but I'm planning on putting a pretty thick coat of epoxy over the top of it to level things out before I really try to get things smooth. So I think I've got the high stuff knocked down enough so that epoxy is going to stick pretty well, and I can see where I really need it at. And I have, these seams are relatively smooth going across the seams where I have a couple of different numbers of layers of the fiberglass cloth under there. That was 265 grams of resin spread across probably 24 square feet, maybe 30 square feet, counting on those sidewalls, although I didn't really spread it as thickly on the sidewalls. I felt like it was just a little bit too much resin. I was deliberately dropping a little bit off the side on that back side, but it wasn't a lot too much. So, I don't have a lot left over in the pot or anything. So I think for the first time I'm smoothing out a large amount of resin here, kind of self-leveling the resin. That's a decent amount. After I sand this smooth, I'll have to go over it again, and I'll probably go down to like 175 grams of resin at that point. From this angle, you can see how it's not perfectly smooth, and if I had a big 8-inch foam brush or a 32-inch wide squeegee, I probably could have gotten it a little bit nicer, because you can see some of these lines are the squeegee lines, but it's pretty smooth on top. There's a little bit over here where I can still see the cloth weave through it, so I'm definitely going to need more there, where I probably could have put a little more on. But it's definitely smoother than it was, and once it's dry and sanded, it'll be an improvement. Sanded and ready for another coat of epoxy paint. I have smoothed out some of these lines here where the epoxy cloth folded over. I made kind of a new line right up there with just, a higher level of epoxy there than over here. I still have a few drips running vertically, but they're a lot harder to see now. Knocked down quite a bit. So, I think it's time to put a little bit more epoxy over the top of this and smooth it out some more. Alright, I used 150 grams of epoxy and basically painted the back and the sides of this. After we let that cure, we will sand it down and try to get nice and flat. So right here, you see an area that still is probably going to need a little bit more epoxy resin. Over here, it's super smooth. You can't feel the woven fiber texture. Here, it's quite smooth. It's mostly a kind of a matte finish, and I wouldn't say you could feel the texture of the cloth underneath, but it's not glass smooth like over at these two other areas. You can feel, like right there it goes whoosh, and over here it's smooth. So I'm going to be sanding it down a little bit, and then probably doing one more layer of epoxy, and we'll probably be done at that point. So it's not show car smooth, but it's getting pretty close. I am going to paint on one very thin layer of epoxy resin, sand that down, and unless something goes wrong, I'm going to call that good. I was using a wide foam brush for that. After this cures, we'll hit it probably with some type of a smaller grit, maybe a 100, 150, 200 grit sandpaper, just to knock down any brush lines, and then call it good enough for primer. This opening here is going to have a drawer, but these two openings are just going to have hinged doors. Those are nice and flat. The only tricky thing is I'm going to be putting cedar boards on both sides, so I have a place for the hinges to screw to and the catches to be mounted in and connect to. There are some alloys of stainless steel that are magnetic, but generally, if somebody sends you something that's magnetic, it's probably not good stainless steel. So these piano hinges I bought were supposed to be stainless steel, and they're non-magnetic, so I'm going to trust that they are. They included screws to mount them, which I'm not going to use. I'm going to go out and buy some 304 stainless screws of the appropriate size, because I don't trust these guys to not rust. These piano hinges came with number 4 half-inch long wood screws that were silver. I don't believe they were stainless steel. I do have brass in stock, but then you have the whole brass on silver look, so I'm probably going to go and buy number 4 wood screws in 304 stainless. There's only about a half-inch on each side of this hinge, so I'm going to have to make the gap between these two boards pretty small. And I'm going to be putting, I only need about, an inch of cedar on the inside edge here to screw into. I might rip a board down to make it nice and narrow, or I might just use a full width cedar board. Now on the opening latching side, I got these guys here. They're basically going to need a 1.5 inch hole to mount into, so I'm probably going to use a full width piece of cedar there. Also with your magnet test, you can see that the part that's outside is non-magnetic, and this little bit here is non-magnetic, but the screws and this metal backing plate stick pretty hard to that magnet. Also the latching system that goes on the inside here sticks pretty hard. So I'm just going to have to use them, and at least these guys are inside somewhat protected from the weather. So these guys didn't come with any instructions on how to use them, but my best guess is that I'm going to have to put a block of wood down here mount this to the side of it such that the door will hit this guy, and that's what keeps the door from swinging inside. And as it goes down, this guy will click in place there, and so when I want to open the door, I lift up on this ring, it pulls in, and I can lift it up. So I believe that's how I'm going to be mounting this. It's going to serve dual purposes. One is to keep the door from going any farther in than this, and the other is as a catch for that little guy that pops in as the door closes. And what that means is that I'm trying to get this piece here kind of at the inside edge of whatever door hardware I have. So that's about the right height. Now for the drawer hardware, I got these 16-inch long full extension drawer rails, and basically one will mount on each side here, and then the drawer will slide in and out on them. Now obviously there's going to be a gap here. It's going to be, about half, well, maybe a little bit less than a ½ inch on each side, but the drawer front will go all the way across the front. Digging through my offcuts, I have found just enough cedar so I can do the latch side on this door front, the latch side on that door front, a pull latch in the top of the drawer on the front of the drawer, as well as if I rip this guy into two pieces, I can put hinge mounts on either side of this guy, because both hinges are going to be on this guy, because that door I want to open in and this door I want to open in. I knew this large offcut would come in useful. The bottom of this door here is going to be a little bit angled. And that's why you keep an unblemished blade just for cutting foam, because it can leave an edge that's nicer than factory. Don't forget to take the protective plastic off before you fix fiberglass. I have a piece of foam underneath this guy to make it mostly level. I have these pieces of plastic to prevent this thing from being stuck to what's below it. I have some weights to hold this down, some clamps to hold it in. Now it's just a matter of putting the Gorilla Glue on. I'm going to be putting the glue on the wood. These are smaller pieces, and I'm spraying the foam so that it'll have enough moisture to set. Although I expect in Florida that last step may be optional. Before you put the glue back, you have to get all the air out, or at least as much as possible. Alright, we'll have to do a little bit of sanding, but the plastic kept that Gorilla Glue from sticking to anything else. Today I'm going to be sanding down all of this epoxy that dripped over this guy when it was in a different orientation, as well as sanding these guys flat so I can put fiberglass on them and make the doors for my bench front. I've cut one layer of fiberglass cloth, notched the corners, and it's all ready to epoxy bright and early tomorrow morning. I mixed up 75 grams for the first board, and that was almost enough. Then I mixed up 90 grams for the second board, and used a little bit over here, and didn't have enough for that guy. So I mixed up another 50 grams and used that for both of them, and that was plenty. I think 200 grams total would have been about right. Alright, it's been 4 or 5 hours. Let's see if these guys are ready to be cut off. Oh yeah, definitely ready.